Welcome, one and all, to the complete Final Fantasy XIV timeline explained. At first, I actually wasn't going to attempt to do this, but the more I got into Final Fantasy XIV, the more I wanted to help both newcomers and old players of the game understand, catch up, and or get a refresher on all of the events of Final Fantasy XIV before the next expansion, Endwalker, comes out. For this video, I will be covering everything you need to know from the first expansion, A Realm Reborn. Each expansion will get its own video, so I'm able to pack in a lot of detail, but also streamline the story better for you so it's easier to follow along. I will also briefly go over the events of the story that lead up to A Realm Reborn, Final Fantasy XIV Patch 1.0. Not all of 1.0 is necessary to know for the overarching story of Final Fantasy XIV, so I just plan to cover the important bits as fast and as concisely as I can. If you guys find this video helpful, please do let me know by leaving a like on the video. That tells me you guys really like this and that you actually want me to cover the rest of the expansions as well. Oh, and one more quick disclaimer, I apologize ahead of time if I mispronounce some names here and there. You're just gonna have to deal with it. But anyways, without further ado, let's get started by quickly going over the event that started it all, Final Fantasy XIV Patch 1.0. Our story begins in a world called Hydaelyn, more specifically though on a continent known as Eorzea. The time in which the ending events of 1.0 take place would be in the last days of the 6th Astral Era and lead into the 7th Umbral Era. In Final Fantasy XIV, there are periods of time that alternate known as either an Astral Era and an Umbral Era. The events that would define an Astral Era would be a specific time period of prosperity and growth. Likewise, an Umbral Era is a period of time in which the people of the land experience disarray as they struggle to recover from events known as calamities. Calamities are catastrophic events that are usually caused by one of the 6 ether elements. So far in the history of Eorzea, we've had a calamity caused by each of the ether elements. In order, we've had the Wind Calamity, which caused the first Umbral Era, the Lightning Calamity caused the second Umbral Era, the Fire caused the third, the Earth Calamity caused the fourth, the Ice caused the fifth, and the Water Calamity caused the 6th Umbral Era to transpire. Going into the 6th Astral Era, many of the people in Eorzea figured that because all 6 of the known elements that had caused the calamities had come and gone now, this would spell the end of the Age of Calamities, and that another calamity would never happen again. But as we know, there's a lot more to come. The ending events of 1.0 were primarily started by the Garlean Empire, the seemingly big bag antagonist of Final Fantasy XIV. The Garlean Empire launched a full-scale invasion on the continent of Eorzea. Of course, they are met with opposition from the Allied forces, which consists of the 3 Grand Companies, which we will go over later in the video. The Garlean Empire and the Allied forces meet on the plains of Carteneau for one final battle to decide the fate of Eorzea. In a last-ditch effort to cleanse the land of Eorzea and to also get rid of a threat known as the Primals, the Garlean Empire carried out a plan that was influenced by a mysterious group of people called the Ascians. This plan was to use the ancient magic meteor to summon down the moon, known as Dalamud, which would crash into the land and erase all life on Eorzea. The Garlean Empire were successful in casting Meteor and summoning Dalamud to Eorzea, but little did they know that it wasn't actually just a moon, but a prison holding the primal known as Bahamut. Bahamut escapes from his prison and does a huge number on both the Garlean Empire and the Grand Companies, which resulted in many lives lost, as well as destroying a majority of Eorzea and its landscape. This event would be known as the Calamity. Trust me, I know there's a lot of calamities, but as soon as we get into A Realm Reborn and you see the characters mention the Calamity, just know they are referring to this event unless otherwise stated. There is an attempt to seal Bahamut by a man named Louis Soir, but the attempt failed and Bahamut set off one last mega flare which not only wiped out a few major characters, who we'll be covering in greater detail later, but it also marked the end of what was known as Final Fantasy XIV Patch 1.0. What's really cool about the ending events of 1.0 is that the developers of Final Fantasy XIV tied the closing of the game servers to the actual story's ending. That's why after the game relaunched at a later date, the game was now called Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn. Now that we have covered pretty much everything you need to know about 1.0, let's jump into what I know you're really here for, the complete story of Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn explained. Here we start with Patch 2.0. 5 years after the Calamity, and still in the 7th Umbral Era, our story begins with an opening cutscene that shows our character, known as the Warrior of Light, waking up in a space-like void. While waking up, we see a giant blue crystal speaking to us and telling us to hear, feel, and think. All of a sudden, a masked individual in dark clothing appears before us. The masked person lunges at the Warrior of Light, and the two begin battle, but not before our character wakes up in a moving carriage. This is where our adventure begins. Our main goal in coming to one of the 3 great city-states, depending on which you picked, whether it be Ul'dah, Limsa or Gridania, is to become an adventurer. The beginning cutscenes may also differ depending on the area you have picked, but the differences end after the beginning cutscenes. For the sake of the video though, let's just say we pick the city of Ul'dah as our starting city. No matter which path you choose, you spend a good amount of time going around Eorzea and completing many quests and helping out the people of the realm. During one of your quests, you meet a silver-haired man who thanks you for finding his friend. Suddenly, a beast attacks both of you, but you quickly defeat it. Afterwards, you find a single blue crystal on the ground, and once you pick it up, you start to have another vision. The Warrior of Light is once again in a space-like void, and you hear the same words as last time. Hear, feel, and think. The blue crystal from last time makes another appearance and introduces itself as Hydaelyn. Hydaelyn is a goddess who created the very planet in which we inhabit. Hydaelyn tells the Warrior of Light that light once shone throughout the realm, but has grown dim thanks to the darkness that lurks throughout the world. In order to stop the darkness, Hydaelyn asks the Warrior of Light to continue on their journey and to find the other crystals of light, similar to the one we picked up prior to speaking to Hydaelyn. She explains that once we do, we will have the power to banish the darkness out of the world. After you wake up, you continue about your days doing more quests. While doing so, you end up catching the name of the silver-haired man from earlier. His name is Thancred. While you continue to do these quests, your character has taken notice that they experience sudden losses in consciousness and see certain events that they may not have been there for. Regardless, you, or the Warrior of Light, shakes them off and continues their quest across the realm. Eventually, you gain a ton of fame across the land as the adventurer that can do pretty much anything they set their mind to. While in Ul'dah, you save a helpless woman from a gang of bandits. In doing so, you attract the attention of one of the members of the group called the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. They take you back to their base of operations, the Waking Sands. As you walk through the entrance, you find a character that goes by the name of Tataru. Tataru lets the other Scions know of your presence, and you are then introduced to the leader of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, Minfilia. Here, Minfilia tells you what the Scions of the Seventh Dawn are and what they hope to achieve. The Scions are an order that transcend the political boundaries of the land, and all they wish for is the preservation of the future of Eorzea. She also talks about the problem they are having in regards to the godlike beings known as the Primals, and that they are a bane to Eorzea. Soon after, Minfilia talks about the mysterious power that has been with you since the beginning of your journey, the very same one that makes you lose consciousness every so often. This power is known as the Echo. The Echo is a special ability that very few individuals possess, one of them being Minfilia herself, which is why she knows so much about it. The Echo lets you resonate with other people's souls and lets you see their past. You're even able to interact with what you see, but you cannot change the outcome of what has already happened. The Echo also lets you speak every known language in the world. The downside, however, is that you aren't able to use it at will. And of course, one last important tidbit of information, aside from the Echo to share, is that all of the Scions have a deep connection to the great sage Louisoix. Minfilia then brings the conversation back to the topic of the Primals and how while they exist, the realm cannot take a step towards true peace. She tells us that the Echo will be needed if we wish to end the Primal threat. She asks us if we will join the Scions, and we agree without a moment's hesitation. Minfilia then introduces us to the other members of the Scions, well, to all of the Scions that are currently present: Ida, Papalymo, Thancred, who we've already met, Y'shtola, Urianger, and Tataru. After introductions are said and done, Minfilia tells us of our first job as being part of the Scions. She explains that we have received a request from one of the grand companies, the Immortal Flames. She explains that we need to investigate a robbery, as well as a string of disappearances, and that a race of lizard-like beastmen known as the Amul-Jah are somehow involved. Thancred goes on to say that the Amul-Jah had left behind evidence that implies that the Primal Ifrit is also involved. The Amul-Jah are known worshippers of Ifrit, so it goes without saying that the Scions believe the crimes were committed in the name of Ifrit. From this point, we travel to our next destination, Camp Drybone with the Immortal Flames. This is the area where the supposed crimes have been taking place. In order to weed out the Amul-Jah, the Immortal Flames set up an ambush and we lie in wait until we see them approach. Though there is just one problem. It seems that there is a traitor among the Immortal Flames and we end up getting ambushed instead. We are knocked out and are taken by the Amul-Jah to the summoning place of Ifrit. It is then when the Primal is summoned before us. It turns out that the Amul-Jah had been kidnapping any and everyone so they may use them as sacrifices to their god. Ifrit tells the Warrior of Light and the other captured Immortal Flames that they will be his loyal subjects and sacrifices. Ifrit then breathes over the party with a blue flame. This blue flame releases our restraints, but as the Warrior of Light looks around, they notice that the party is now under the influence of Ifrit's control and are almost happy to be his followers and sacrifices. The only one not under the control of Ifrit is the Warrior of Light. Both the Amalja and Ifrit are surprised by this, but then explain that because of the blessing we receive from Hydaelyn, the Echo, we are unaffected by any of the Primal's brainwashing. A battle ensues with the Primal, but we quickly defeat him. The Warrior of Light then finds a red crystal of light, which happens to be one of the 6 main crystals that represent each element. The one we just received is the Fire Crystal, obviously. We then see that there are 2 individuals watching the fight the entire time, Nero and Livia of the Garlean Empire. They make remarks about the Primal not being as strong as they thought, but are impressed by the actions of the Warrior of Light. After the battle, we head back to the Waking Sands, and Minfilia gives us a more detailed explanation of what's going on with the Primals. She explains that the entire point in the Amalja abducting people to use as sacrifices is due to the fact that the Primals must consume ether if they wish to remain in the physical realm. When the world is thriving and there is no hardship, Primals actually possess no physical form, but when the world is in chaos, those who worship the Primals cry out to them, and that gives them temporary form in the world. Thancred then explains the brainwashing that took place earlier. This process is called tempering, and it's how Primals control their followers. It didn't work on the Warrior of Light, and this is why Minfilia said earlier that the Echo would be the key in dealing with the Primal threat. Thancred then tells us something disheartening. Anyone that falls under a Primal's tempering is tempered forever. This means that even after defeating any of the Primals, if anyone who doesn't have the power of the Echo falls under the tempering of a Primal, they are later put to death. This is why we continue to fight the Primal threat so we can save as many lives as possible. Thancred then proceeds to say that he has other matters to attend to, but not before cursing himself for not being able to save some of the Immortal Flames, and that if Louisoix was still alive, he wouldn't have let that happen. After everything is said and done, the 3 Grand Companies show up in the Waking Sands in an attempt to try and recruit the Warrior of Light due to the fame they received after defeating the Primal Ifrit, the Immortal Frames from Ul'dah, the Maelstrom from Lenza Lamenza, and the Order of the Twin Adder from Gridania. It doesn't matter which company you end up joining, but accepting any of them puts the Warrior of Light on a mission. During this mission, you end up meeting some familiar names from the Final Fantasy series, Biggs and Wedge. It's here they tell you that they are engineers from Garland Ironworks, and that they work for a man called Sid Garland, who has been missing ever since the calamity of 5 years ago. After helping out Biggs, Wedge, and learning about Sid, the Warrior of Light returns to Minfilia, and she tells us of her next mission. She explains that in order to understand more about Primals, it would be wise to gain the perspective of the Sylphs, a beast tribe who worship the Primal Ramuh. As soon as you arrive at the village of the Sylphs, it's evident that they don't trust you, so you undergo a few missions to prove yourself and gain their trust. During the mission to visit the Sylphs, the Warrior of Light realizes that there is a radical group of Sylphs trying to summon their Primal. Eventually, you go to find the Sylph leader, Phrixio, who had been fleeing from Garlean soldiers, but not before encountering the very same masked man who we had seen at the very beginning of our journey. The masked man introduces himself as La Habrea, an Ascian who claims to be the servant to their one true god. At this point in time, we don't know much about the mysterious group known as the Ascians, but only that they stand to be in the way of the Warrior of Light at every passing turn. La Habrea then unleashes a giant monster for us to fight as he escapes. Once defeated, we find Phrixio and end up returning to the Sylph village where he agrees to tell us more about Ramuh. Phrixio then explains that the Sylphs have no desire for conflict as much as the people of Gridania, the Scions, or anyone else, and tells us they won't summon Ramuh unless a great danger threatens the Sylph tribe. Before leaving the Sylph village, Phrixio gives us our 3rd Ether Crystal, the Lightning Crystal, as thanks and a show of trust. After coming to a mutual understanding that both parties have a strong desire for peace, the Warrior of Light heads back to the Waking Sands to talk to Minfilia. Now that the Primal threat seems to be at a standstill for now, Minfilia thinks it's best for us to focus our efforts into investigating La Habrea and the other Ascians. She mentions that prior to the calamity, the Ascians took great pains to remain hidden and found it odd that they would appear out of the blue like that. The Warrior of Light undergoes various leads to investigate La Habrea and the various crimes the Ascians have perpetrated. Unfortunately, not much is figured out, and the Warrior of Light returns to Minfilia, and she tells us that the Maelstrom of Lenza Lamenza has asked for our assistance in dealing with the beast tribe known as the Kobolds. The Kobolds have successfully summoned their primal, Titan. She says that unlike Ifrit, we don't know much about Titan, so we take this opportunity to venture out and seek out a party called the Company of Heroes. These are the only people to have beaten Titan in the past. We go through a few missions in order to learn about Titan before we finally meet him in battle. The Warrior of Light defeats Titan, and we are granted the 4th Crystal of Light, the Earth Crystal. After the battle, we are once again watched by Nero of the Garlean Empire. This time, though, he is joined by a masked individual known as Ratatan. La Habrea also shows up and takes note that we have the 4th crystal. Nero and Ratatan speak about Titan for a short bit before saying that it's time that they move forward with their plans. Thankfully, Y'shtola was in hiding and overheard their conversation and has come to the conclusion that the Garlean Empire and the Ascians are working together, and wonders what their common goal may be. The Warrior of Light returns to the Waking Sands, but not to celebration, only to horror. As the Warrior of Light walks in, they are greeted by the sight of many corpses of their comrades. Walking forward a bit more, and we see that Noraxia of the Sylphs is on the ground dying. It's then when the power of the Echo kicks in and shows us what had just happened at the Waking Sands during her absence. Garlean soldiers, led by the person we saw with Nero named Livia, had invaded the Waking Sands and took Urianger, Tataru, Papalymo, and of course Minfilia away as prisoners. Noraxia then tells us with its dying breath the last words of Minfilia before she was taken away. The Warrior of Light is to take refuge at a certain church located in the east. Once arrived at the church, we meet Father Illuid and a man who goes by the name of Marquise. Marquise is a survivor of the Battle of Carteneau from 5 years ago, and he has been staying with Illuid because of the damages to his memory he had received during the battle. Alphino walks into the church and tells us that he wants to do his part in reviving the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. Alphino turns to Marquise and ends up calling him Cid, and that Eorzea needs his help once again. It turns out that Marquise is actually no other than the very same Cid Garland, the man who had gone missing after the battle 5 years ago, the same master engineer that Biggs and Wedge had mentioned. Alphino calling out to him had awoken Cid from his amnesia. Alphino then tells us that the Ixal, bird-like beastmen, have summoned their primal Garuda and that she plans to torment the people of Eorzea as they speak. In order for us to get to Garuda in the first place, Alphino tells Cid that we need him and his airship. After the group comes to an agreement, we head to the place called the Stone Vigil. We enlist the help of a man called Haurchefant during our efforts to reach Cid's airship after helping him with some problems of his own. Once everything is said and done, we find Cid's airship, the Enterprise, at the very top of the Stone Vigil, but it's guarded by a sleeping dragon. Alphino and Cid sneak on to the Enterprise in order to repair the airship, but while doing that, La Habrea appears and pits the dragon against us. Once defeated, we are granted the 5th Crystal of Light, the Ice Crystal. Even though the Enterprise is in bad shape, Cid is still able to fly the group to Gridania, where he will be able to fix it completely. Once landed in Gridania, Alphino and Cid come to the conclusion that if we wish to get to Garuda in one piece with the Enterprise, it needs to be strengthened with something called corrupted crystals. From this point, the Warrior of Light goes on many quests in order to track down the very same crystals that will help the company get to Garuda. Once collected, we go back to Cid and travel to where Garuda awaits. On the way to the battle with the Primal, the sounds of the Enterprise completely remind Cid of who he used to be, and he starts to remember everything about his life and his purpose for being here. The company then arrives to see the Ixal have captured other Beastmen tribes that the Warrior of Light have fought in the past. The Warrior of Light starts to take on Garuda while Alphino and Cid fight off the Ixal Beast tribe. Unlike the other fights the Warrior of Light has participated in with the other Primals, Garuda has seemingly endless energy from her devout followers. She tries to end the Warrior of Light with a final attack, but she ends up getting hit with one of our own. This causes her to get seriously injured, and you end up receiving the 6th and final crystal, the Wind Crystal. While Garuda and her followers are questioning how she was defeated, Gaius Belsar, the general of the Garlean army, comes into the battle. Gaius starts to taunt Garuda, angering her in the process, and she starts to attack the other Beastmen tribes. In an effort to avoid being killed, the different Beastmen tribes yell out and pray for their primals to come and save them, and that's exactly what they do, which is exactly what Garuda wants. She wants the other primals to be summoned so that she may take all of their ether and become stronger. Both Ifrit and Titan end up being summoned, but that's exactly what Gaius was planning on. As soon as Gaius sees all the primals, he calls forth the Garlean Empire's strongest weapon, the Ultima Weapon. One by one, Ultima Weapon ends up absorbing each of the primals and adding to its own power. Once consumed, Gaius tells the party that Eorzea needs to surrender or be crushed by the Garlean Empire. He then flees the scene aboard the Ultima Weapon. Thinking they have no other choice, Alphino suggests that the party retreat to the Waking Sands in order to come up with a new plan of attack, but also to reform the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. Once arrived at the Waking Sands, the party finds out from Ida and Y'shtola that the other Scions are still alive and are being held prisoner at a location called the Castrum Sentry. Y'shtola then states that before a rescue plan is carried out, the Scions must first gather intelligence on the stronghold of Castrum Sentry. From this point, we spend a few side quests preparing to raid the stronghold. Once the preparations are completed, the party arrives at Castrum Sentry and are successful in rescuing the other Scions, but before we depart from the stronghold, we turn to see Gaius and the Ultima Weapon. Minfilia shines some background information on the Ultima Weapon and how it's a relic of the ancient Allegan Empire. It is a weapon that was previously used to take out primals by the Allegans themselves. Seemingly out of nowhere, La Habrea appears next to Gaius. It is then revealed that La Habrea's identity is no other than Thancred himself. Due to Ultima Weapon firing at the Enterprise, we have no choice but to leave the scene and make a hasty retreat. During the retreat, Minfilia makes a suggestion that we meet with the 3 leaders of the city-states. The leaders were originally going to surrender to Gaius and accept the ultimatum he gave in fear of being destroyed by the ultimate weapon. It was also brought up that it's only been 5 years since the last calamity and the people of Eorzea are still trying to rebuild from it, but luckily Minfilia, Alphino, and Cid convinced them not to surrender, but to fight for the people of Eorzea. It is here that the Scions and the 3 leaders agree to declare war against the Garlean Empire. This operation is dubbed Operation Archon. Once returned to the Waking Sands to prepare for the war, Minfilia gives us more information about the mysterious group known as the Ascians. The Ascians are immortal beings without physical form. Since the beginning of time, they have always made it their mission to spread chaos throughout the world from the shadows. She then tells us that the Ascians entrap and possess mortal men by artifacts known as Crystals of Darkness. Minfilia believes that having such a crystal will be the key to saving Thancred. She then pulls out a replica Crystal of Darkness she had received earlier. Minfilia continues to explain that the Crystal of Darkness that binds La Habrea to Thancred must be on his person, and that if we hope to free him from the Ascian influence, we have to destroy the crystal. She asks the Warrior of Light if we could save Thancred, and of course, we agree. The only thing left to do now is to go over the specifics of Operation Archon. As it stands, the plan is to strike at every Imperial stronghold that stands on the Eorzean soil. This way, they are able to weaken the Empire's strength considerably before going after Gaius himself. Now, both the first and second phase of the plan is underway. After taking on many side quests and helping destroy various Imperial strongholds while also defeating the likes of Garlean generals, Ratatan and Livia, whom we saw earlier in the story, we journey into a place called the Praetorium, where it is said that the ultimate weapon lies in wait. By the time we reach the lower levels of the Praetorium, we are then met face to face with Nero. A battle ensues and we emerge victorious, but Nero manages to run away at the last second. We now come face to face with Gaius himself. Gaius tells us that the primals shouldn't be the ones to have power over the world, but man should, which is why he's so adamant about taking over the entire world so it may be ruled under one power, the Garlean Empire. After he realizes his words have no effect on you, you begin a battle. You end up besting him in the first round, but then Gaius begins to use the ultimate weapon. After a grueling fight, you end up winning over Gaius and the ultimate weapon. La Habrea then comes forth and tells the Warrior of Light and Gaius that the ultimate weapon was something he sought after the entire time. He then takes the core of the ultimate weapon and casts the ultimate magic, Ultima. This ends up destroying the Praetorium, but luckily for the Warrior of Light, Hydaelyn steps in and protects the Warrior of Light from the spell. We fight Gaius for a final time and end up winning once again. Once Gaius has been defeated for good, La Habrea confronts us for the final battle. Finally, we are able to fight and defeat the Ascian. We banish him with the power of light and break the crystal that lets La Habrea control Thancred. After the battle, we pick up the unconscious Thancred and make our best effort to escape the Praetorium, which is now about to blow up in a fiery explosion. The Warrior of Light and Thancred successfully make it back to the war front to meet with our friends and the other Scions, and victory has been achieved for the realm of Eorzea. While standing to the side, the Warrior of Light, the Scions, and many warriors that participated in this battle stand before the leaders of the Grand Companies. All of the leaders give a speech to the success that has been won for the sake of the land. Due to the end of the battle coming to a close, the 3 leaders hereby declare the end of the 7th Umbral Era, and now the age has begun its 7th Astral Era. And of course, if you remember my earlier explanation, this is a momentous occasion as the declaration of the 7th Astral Era speaks to a joyous time of peace and prosperity. Or at the very least, that's what I would like to say, but just as the declaration of the 7th Astral Era was made, the Warrior of Light has one more vision. It shows a gigantic crystal of darkness, one that looks very similar to Hydaelyn herself, except this time it's a dark purple. A soldier comes up to announce to everyone that a certain primal has been summoned. Right after, we are greeted with a scene that shows a group of Ascians standing together. As the camera pans more, we see no other than La Habrea himself. It turns out that he survived the battle and has reconnected with his fellow Ascians. Here, they agree that they must summon their one true god, Zodiark. And this is where the original story of A Realm Reborn ends, but only for the post-game of A Realm Reborn to begin. From this point on, I will be covering the post-game of A Realm Reborn. The story of A Realm Reborn post-game spans from patch 2.1 to patch 2.5. Due to how the post-game is handled in Final Fantasy XIV, every piece that I go over will be, in this case, everything that I cover from here on out will directly lead into the next expansion, Heavensward. Don't worry, I know that was a lot of information to process, so I suggest taking a quick break and coming back once you're ready. If you don't need a break, then let's go ahead and get ready and jump into patch 2.1 and cover up to 2.5, where the real juicy part of the story begins. But wait, there's more. Okay, listen, this is editor's note. This is actually fourth wall breaking. I'm currently editing this video right now, and I forgot that we have to go over the Crystal Tower storyline quest line, but don't worry, it's only, how long is that audio? About 2 minutes long, so I cover it very quickly. We'll get into the real nice, juicy part of the story right after we cover that, all right? I hope you guys are enjoying the video so far. I love you. Keep watching. Here, I would like to very, very, very briefly explain the importance of the Crystal Tower side quest. This takes place after 2.0 and covers some background of the Allegan civilization. While I would go over every little specific piece of the quest line, I don't believe it to be too necessary, only because the most important part of the quest line comes from the characters you meet and what happens to them. Long story short though, the aid of the Warrior of Light is requested by a group of people called the Sons of the Saint Coinarch. Their goal is researching the relics of the ancient Allegan Empire, and one of those relics of the Allegan Empire that they wish to research happens to be the Crystal Tower itself. You venture into the tower with the Sons of Saint Coinarch, Cid, and a new character named Grahatia, who is actually one of the students of Baldessian. And surprisingly, you are joined by Nero, but he has his own plans. As you progress through the tower, you learn more about the Allegan Empire and how much more advanced they are than the rest of the world. Back in the day, the founding ruler Zand commissioned the creator of Dalamud in order to transmit more energy to the tower, but it ended up being too much for the tower to contain, which caused a terrible earthquake that was the prime catalyst for the Fourth Umbral Era. A man named Amon later used Allegan technology to resurrect Zand within a clone body to restore their empire, and the rest of the questline pretty much involves finding and defeating him so his plans don't come into fruition. Near the end, it is revealed that Graha is a royal descendant of the Allegan Empire, and so after the battle, he takes it upon himself to seal both the tower and himself away until the day comes where the tower can not only be viewed as a symbol of peace for all of Eorzea, also until the day where Eorzea is technologically advanced enough to where the tower is no longer a threat to the rest of the world. From this point, the Warrior of Light goes their separate way from the group, and the story continues on. I realize that was an extremely simplified explanation of the Crystal Tower, but if you wish to know even the smallest details, I will leave a link to the wiki in the description below, which can be read in about 5 or so minutes, and then you'll understand why I did this so fast. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get back to the story of A Realm Reborn. After the last battle and emerging victorious versus the Garlean and Ascian threat, the Warrior of Light returns to the Waking Sands, where talk of relocation has been floating around among the Scions. Minfilia states that she wants for the Scions to remain a neutral party outside of the city-states. Due to the popularity gained from the last battle, together with the 3 city-states wanting to recruit the Scions because of that very reason, Alphinaud believes it to be wise to relocate to a place known as Revenant's Toll, which is located in the land of Mordona. As a side note, I will be saying the Rising Stones, as it is the base of the Scions located in the very same area. He says the Scions will never truly be neutral while in Ul'dah territory, and that the Scions should move to Mordona as it is a place of neutrality, and none of the city-states claim the location as their own. Minfilia, on the other hand, is on the fence about moving due to Ul'dah being her adoptive home. From this point, the Warrior of Light goes on a few quests in order to find Minfilia's adoptive mother, Flamen, who had gone missing after the Calamity 5 years prior. We end up finding her, and as a result, Flamen reunites with her daughter. After an emotional reunion, Flamen urges Minfilia that if she wishes for the Scions to continue their good work, they must follow Alphinaud's plan and move to Mordona. Minfilia accepts, and we start preparing for the big move. During the move, we get word from Gridania that something akin to a primal threatens the land, and that perhaps it may have something to do with the Ascians. After requesting our presence, we head to Gridania and meet a Moogle named Kuplo Kop. Kuplo tells us that a bunch of Moogles have summoned Good King Mooglebog XII. We aren't sure if the Good King is a primal or whether he's something similar, but the leader of Gridania, Connie Senna, wants us to defeat him. We agree and make our way to the Great King. We eventually defeat him and all is right in Gridania. For now. After the battle, we make our way back to the Waking Sands. Before setting off on this last mission to defeat the King Moogle, it was decided that the Scions would move to Mordona in small, separate groups in order to avoid attention, and it turns out that we were paired with Minfilia to be the last group to leave. Once arrived at the Waking Sands, we meet with Urianger, and not before we hear a scream from Minfilia. Wanting to help her, we rush to see Minfilia sprawled out on the ground in pain. The Echo then starts to show us what had just occurred to put Minfilia in such a state. An Ascian wearing a white robe appears before Minfilia, claiming to be an emissary of the Ascians and that he doesn't wish to fight. He claims that he wants nothing more than to come to an understanding so that Ascians and the rest of the world may know peace with one another. He also informs us that La Habrea is indeed still alive from the last battle. The white-robed Ascian seems to think very highly of the Echo and those who have the very same gift. The Ascian then proceeds to bid farewell and leave, but not before Minfilia tries to attack him. He turns and attacks Minfilia with a sort of dark energy. While it did knock her out, it did not kill her, proving that the Ascian really did come in peace. After coming back from the Echo, Minfilia asks Urianger to send word to an ally group known as the Students of Baldesion, and to ask them to secure more information on the Ascians. During our search for the white-robed Ascian, we end up finding him, and it's here where he tells us his name to be Elidibus. Other than saying that there is going to be a great change soon, he says we will meet again and then disappears. Now that the preparations for the move are all said and done, the Scions move straight to the Rising Stones without delay. Once we arrive, Urianger tells us that every attempt to contact their friends, the Students of Baldesion, have ended in failure. Minfilia sends Urianger to investigate and tells the Warrior of Light that we can do whatever we wish until we are needed. After some time passes, we get word from Alphinaud that some refugees from a land called Doma have landed in Eorzea in an attempt to find help. As it turns out, after our victory over the Garlean Empire in patch 2.0, a war of succession broke out in the capital of the Empire, also known as Garlemald. Garlemald had actually taken other lands captive under their control, and Doma was no exception. The person we meet who hails from Doma is named Yugiri. Yugiri asks the Scions if she and her assistants may ask the Lords of Ul'dah to provide any help they can. The party, along with Yugiri, come face to face with the higher-ups of Ul'dah, only to be refused help because they do not have the necessary supplies to give away, as they need to help the people of Eorzea first. It should be noted that the Sultana, Nanamo, and the Immortal Flames leader Raban were very willing to help Yugiri and her people. There was also one other member of the Ul'dah higher-ups, also known as the Syndicate, who wanted to help, named Teleji Adeleji, but alas, one of the other members named Lolorito refused and convinced the other Syndicate members to cast a vote not to help in his favor. Once negotiations had finished, the Scions as well as Teleji offered to help Yugiri move her people over to Mordona so that they may have a place to stay for the time being. During our time away, Minfilia reveals to us that a beast tribe known as the Sahagins are trying to summon their primal Leviathan. The Warrior of Light and company move to where the summoning is taking place, only to find out that the priest of the Sahagins has the power of the Echo. Leviathan then ends up devouring the priest in order to gain more power. After a strenuous battle, the party ends up defeating Leviathan and all is good again. Later, we head back to the Rising Stones to speak with Minfilia. She believes she's starting to understand the true power of the Echo after your latest quests. All of a sudden, Urianger comes in and tells us that the land for which the Students of Baldesion had lived in is no more, and it was ravished by a magic that is similar to Ultima. We are then treated to a scene where Teleji Adeleji is sitting alone in the dark. We then see his manservant come up to him and say that the deed is done. The servant asks Teleji the reason behind his most recent order, and all we see is that Teleji delivers a sinister smile and says the word revolution. Sometime after, we get word from Tataru that Alphinaud had been hurt dealing with a refugee uprising. He turns out to be fine, but both the Warrior of Light and Alphinaud are summoned by Raban to talk about the matter further. Both the Sultana and Raban believe that it was Teleji Adeleji's doing in having orchestrated the refugee uprising. They believe he intends to exploit the chaos used from the uprising to take control of a land called Cartano Flats, because there is an Allegan creation similar to that of the Ultima weapon recently found there. In short, by getting this device named Omega, Teleji would have the power to control all of Eorzea if he wanted to. With hands being tied at the moment, we take our leave to Gridania, where we have some weird developments happening. Khan E. Senna tells us that the Sylphs have summoned their primal Ramuh. What's interesting about this is that unlike the other primals, Ramuh doesn't rage around for the destruction of others. He is a kind, wise, and benevolent soul who only wants to protect his children, the Sylphs. Because we have the power of the Echo, Khan E. Senna asks us to negotiate with the primals so that the hard-earned peace with the Sylphs do not go unnoticed, and we agree to do so. Ramuh states to us that he doesn't trust us and has us undergo a trial. We end up passing his test, and Ramuh deems the Warrior of Light worthy enough to be the mediator between the city-states and the Sylphs. After helping with Ramuh, we return to the Rising Stones to get an explanation of how we may be able to deal with the Ascians. Minfilia explains that when any individual dies, their spirits dissolve into the flow of ether and are returned to something called the Ether Realm. In turn, the ether from the Ether Realm streams back into the world, giving rise to new life. Kind of think of it how the live stream works in Final Fantasy VII if you're familiar with that. Anyways, the point is that if we're able to trap the soul of the Ascian into what Urianger describes as an ethereal prison, we would be able to stop the Ascians from coming back again. At present, the party lacks a viable way to entrap and extinguish an Ascian soul, so for now we continue with our duties until such a time comes. After handling a few side quests, you come back to the Rising Stones to see that Alphinaud has taken it upon himself to create his own Grand Company due to his frustration with the other Grand Companies and how they are handling themselves in these recent times. This new Grand Company is known as the Crystal Braves, and its purpose is what Alphinaud has always wanted, for the preservation of Eorzea. The Crystal Braves are a culmination of soldiers from all three of the Grand Companies under Alphino's command. They don't work under one specific region, but for all of Eorzea. After the ceremony that takes place welcoming the Crystal Braves, we receive word that there is a Garlean spy amongst the Immortal Flames. Ilberd, the second in command for the Crystal Braves, tells us that we know nothing about this spy other than them being known as the Ivy. We give Raban word of this and he plans to let his soldiers know. In the meantime, we accompany Alphino to meet with the Lord Commander of the Ishgardian Temple, Sir Emmerich, as well as our old friend Haurchefant. Ishgard had once been a part of the Alliance, but due to Garlean interference they pulled out and closed their borders to all outsiders for an extensive amount of time. Unless Eorzea stands united, Alphino believes that there could be no true freedom and that the nations of Eorzea will fall one by one. Despite all this, Emmerich tells the party that he has no power over the situation, and even if he did, Ishgard has no knights to spare for the effort due to the conflict they've been dealing with that concern both the dragons and the Dravanians, worshippers of the dragons. He does offer us a deal, however. If we are able to keep watch over something called the Keeper of the Lake, which happens to be a draconic god known as the Midgard-Sommer, he will continue to send supplies back to Moradona and aid the rest of Eorzea, as it's the bare minimum he can actually do at the moment. Emmerich goes on to say that if the dragon is resurrected by the Dravanian heretics, Eorzea will suffer for it. Alphino agrees in an effort to unite Ishgard with the other city-states of Eorzea. Suddenly there is talk that a woman who goes by the name of Lady Iceheart is attempting to resurrect Shiva, and we all know what that means. We have another primal to deal with. Before dealing with Iceheart and her people, however, we take some time away and end up finding the spy that was found to be among the Immortal Flames, the one known as Ivy. It turns out that the spy was no other than the second in command to the Immortal Flames. She tells us that the civil war that was going on in Garlemald has ended and that they have chosen a new emperor, a man named Varys Galvus. Bad news, of course, for the Scions, but in order to not be overwhelmed with things to do, we must first focus on the immediate threat before us, so we return to dealing with Iceheart. After many side quests that involve tracking down Iceheart and meeting an individual named Moonbrita who gives us the means of defeating Shiva, we finally find her. She goes on to say that if she summons Shiva, she'll be able to put an end to the war between dragons and humans that Ishgard has been dealing with for over 1,000 years. She believes that she is doing the best thing possible for the future of Eorzea. Using her own body as a vessel, she summons forth Shiva, and we have no choice but to defeat her. After the battle, Iceheart tells us not to squander Mother's gift, talking about the power of the Echo, and that if we want the truth behind the war, we need to seek an audience with Midgard-Sommer. She then disappears. We return to Sir Emmerich, who thanks us for our assistance in dealing with the primal threat. We make our way back to Revenant's Toll to talk about the after events with Iceheart with the rest of the Scions. Here, the Scions question what primals really are. With Iceheart, she herself became a vessel for Shiva, and so the method in summoning the primal has the Scions utterly confused. Due to the words Iceheart spoke to you and the manner of the summoning, it's assumed that she too has the power of the Echo. The group later comes to the conclusion that perhaps meeting with the Midgard-Sommer may provide the Scions with the answers they are looking for. As the meeting with the Scions ends, we get grave news from Alphino that Aline, the former second-in-command to the Immortal Flames that was captured beforehand, has now escaped. We quickly capture her, and it's up to Raban to try and interrogate her, as she is a Garlean spy after all. Alphino is frustrated at the events that had just taken place and goes along to visit Raban in an attempt to learn more about Aline. Before we go to join them, however, we end up learning more from Moonbrita about how we may put an end to the Ascians. She goes over an item called White Auracite, which lets one capture Ascian souls. Once captured, she explains that we need a burst of ether to vanquish the soul once it's been captured. Though, that's about all the Scions have been able to figure out for now, so from this point on we head back to Ul'dah to meet with Alphino and Raban. Once we arrive, Raban tells us about the spy Aline and how she had sold information to a third party here in Eorzea, and the party have every reason to suspect that the one and only Teleji Adeleji is behind all of the trouble. Raban takes his leave to return to his interrogation while the Warrior of Light and Alphino return to the Rising Stones. Back at the Rising Stones, we are introduced to Sir Emmerich's second-in-command, Lucia. She tells us that Emmerich has sent her to the Rising Stones in order to request the Warrior of Light's help with something of dire importance. Lucia explains that the Ishgardians have reason to believe that Midgard-Sommer will be resurrected soon due to a roar that was heard across the land. She asks the Warrior of Light if they may visit the place where the dragon was once defeated, so to check up on the situation, to which we agree. We eventually arrive to find the corpse of Midgard-Sommer. Surprisingly enough, it turns out that Midgard-Sommer was only woken up and not fully revived. Midgard-Sommer tells us that Ishgard will burn by the hands of the dragons. The beast then contemplates killing the Warrior of Light where they stand, but is able to tell that they are Heidelin's chosen and are protected by her blessing. In an effort to get us to understand the truth behind the world and the war, he strips us of Hydaelyn's blessing of light. He then reverts to a smaller size and forms a pact with us so that he may travel with us and watch over our every move. After everything with Midgardsormr is said and done, we return back to the Rising Stones to reveal to Minfilia, Alphinaud, and Urianger about what had just happened to us. Alphinaud wants to help Ishgard and prepare for the impending attack, but says that our hands are tied unless they specifically ask the party for help. Afterwards, Moonbrita asks that we gather the rest of the Silence together so that she may explain an update that she has come across in helping to defeat the Ascians permanently. She explains what we already know so far, but has introduced another item, a siphon, which will let the party create a blade of light that will be used to destroy the captured Ascian souls. Though she believes it may work, she asks the Warrior of Light to accompany her to a testing ground in Northern Thanalan so her theory can be proven true. We arrive in Northern Thanalan to test Moonbrita's siphon, and it ends up being a success, but then we are interrupted by an Ascian who goes by the name of Nabrialis. He taunts us and makes the realization that since we no longer have Hydaelyn's blessing, he is free to return to the Rising Stones and take the staff of the great sage, Louisoix, which had been kept on display in the Scion headquarters. We rush back to the headquarters to see Nabrialis confronting Minfilia, who has the staff in her hands. The reasoning as to why he wants the staff so badly is that he wishes to summon the Ascians' one true god, Zodiark, and to commence yet another umbral calamity. Eventually, we do capture the Ascian and the White Orosite, but unfortunately, because the Warrior of Light no longer has Hydaelyn's blessing, we don't have a means of destroying Nabrialis. All seemed lost until Moonbrita takes it upon herself to sacrifice her life in order to give the Warrior of Light enough ether to summon forth a Blade of Light. With it, we destroy Nabrialis for good. As the Warrior of Light and the other Scions are mourning over Moonbrita's grave, we see dragons fly over and are heading towards the direction of Ishgard. We then receive a call from Alphinaud that we are to meet with Sir Emmerich as he is requesting our help. While we make our way to him, we are shown a scene with Isart and her minions completely decimating the entry border around Ishgard. This means that Ishgard is completely open to any attacks from this point forward from other Dravanians. Isart yells to the sky to alert the dragon kind to come and claim their retribution. We then meet with Emmerich. He starts off our meeting by wanting to introduce us to his close friend and ally, the Azure Dragoon of Ishgard, Estinian. Emmerich then goes on to tell us what Isart plans to do once she invades Ishgard. She hopes to obtain something called Nidhogg's Eye. Nidhogg is one of the 7 great dragons of Ishgard. We are currently unsure what she plans to do with the eye, but she must be stopped, otherwise Ishgard may have to deal with Nidhogg again in the future. It should be noted that Estinian holds the other eye of Nidhogg, which grants him the power of the dragon itself and gives him the ability to hear the dragon speak. Alphinaud questions why Emmerich would ask them for help after refusing to help the Eorzean Alliance back when Operation Archon was taking place. While Emmerich understands his questioning, he asks to understand the terrible things that would happen if Ishgard were to fall, since it would eventually become the rest of Eorzea's problem as well. After a bit of thinking, Alphinaud agrees to help with the effort. We make our way to the entrance leading into Ishgard, known as the Steps of Faith, and here we do battle with one of Nidhogg's trusted champions, Bishop. We are successful in defeating the dragon and pausing the threat to Ishgard, for the time being. We head back to the Rising Stones only to be greeted with yet another mission, but this one involves investigating the disappearance of one of the members of the Crystal Braves. The body of the person in question is found, and it's revealed that a good portion of the Crystal Braves have been bought off by Teleji Adeleji. It is then said that the person who had gone missing had apparently been asking too many questions about the goings-on revolving around Teleji, so he was silenced as a result. Somber news, to say the least. Later, Minfilia tells us that there will be a royal banquet held in Ul'dah that the Scions as well as all of our allies are invited to. Once arrived, we are called upon by the Sultana to speak with her privately. She tells us that she plans to end both the Syndicate and the royal line in Ul'dah. By doing this, Ul'dah will have become a more fair place with equal opportunity for all. Though suddenly, as Nanamo drinks from her wine glass, her eyes widen, she drops her glass and falls to the floor. The Sultana has died. At this very moment, Teleji walks into the room and sees the Sultana's lifeless body. Without a second thought, he claims us, the Warrior of Light, for setting this meeting up and poisoning the Sultana's drink. We are then taken into custody. Soon after, the Brass and Crystal Braves begin taking over the city. Teleji takes the warrior into the dining hall where the other leaders of the city-states and the Scions happen to be, and starts accusing the Scions of plotting and committing the murder of the Sultana. Before everything starts going crazy, the other leaders take their leave. It is then when Teleji starts to boast about how he never liked the Sultana and how happy he is that she's dead. Raban, not wanting to take another word from him, takes his swords and kills Teleji where he stands. Olorito comes forth and tries to have both Raban and the Scions arrested. Raban then tries to kill Olorito for thinking he had a hand in this as well, but Elbrid, the second in command of the Crystal Braves, stops Raban and cuts his arm off. Raban, feeling more anger than pain, tells the Warrior of Light and the Scions to flee and to clear our names. We take his advice and flee through the tunnels under Ul'dah. Pair by pair, the Scions end up separated from each other, trying to fight off their pursuers. First, Ida and Papalymo, then Y'shtola and Thancred. Finally, it is just the Warrior of Light and Minfilia together, but it is during this time when Minfilia hears the voice of Hydaelyn. Minfilia, thinking this is a sign, tells us to escape without her, and we end up doing so. We eventually find Alphinaud and meet Raban's adopted son, Pippin Tarupin. Together, we escape the Corthis where we originally met Emmerich, and we meet with Oshifant. Yugiri also comes to greet us, but this time, it's our first time seeing her face. She lets us know that her people are searching for the Scions, but nothing has come up as of yet. Meanwhile, Alphinaud is cursing himself for putting his friends through this danger and believes that it's his fault for everything that has happened. After a bit of a pep talk from Tataru, it's decided that the party will go to Ishgard and from there, figure out what needs to be done to save our friends. To wrap it all up, we are then shown a scene with La Habrea and Elidibus speaking with one another. They have come to the conclusion that they must figure out a way to stop the Scions from perfecting their method of killing Ascians. We also see that Urianger has appeared with the Ascians and has been feeding them information about the Scions this whole time. Elidibus says that he wishes to talk to Urianger about the fate of the world, and then that's when the screen fades to black. Coining the phrase from the game itself, as long as the Scions exist, dawn will come again. They only need to look heavensward. And that, my friends, is the ending of this massive expansion, and it will be continued, of course, in Heavensward. I wish to thank every single one of you who made it all the way to the end of the video for watching. It's always a pleasure creating these types of videos, and you all give me the strength to put my all into this. Again, if you guys enjoyed, please do consider leaving a like since that tells me you guys want more, and maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss when I cover the rest of the expansions. It's been Limit, and I'll see you guys again in Ishgard. Take it easy.